So what we have is too many humans for the planet, but not enough for the individual economies. And as everyone lives longer, and we all have to care for other things. What you have is this aging workforce. And at the moment, we've had it longer than anyone else. Us and Japan have had this aging workforce problem. So we haven't got enough young people to keep old people like you and me and Edwina, going up in time,
Hang on a minute.
alive. Who's going to be caring for us? Who's going to be wiping our bottoms? It's going to have to be immigrants. All that. Now, but the thing is that somewhere like Nigeria, with its massive population, Nigeria is now on the cusp. And somewhere as big as Nigeria, which used to feed labor around the world, isn't about to have an aging economy and not be able to support its economy. When places like China get there, then we're not. There will probably stop being anybody to immigrate to do the jobs for us.
We've been characterizing this as an equation. If you want to have a functioning society, you need young people who pay taxes and do the work. And you can have them by a higher birth rate, so more are born than die, and therefore the country grows and there's more young people to replace the old people that die. If you don't have that, are you left with having to have immigration to make a society function?
Pretty much, although you can actually have the worst of both worlds. So you can actually have mass immigration, a large part of which is not contributing to the workforce, and that's actually where we are. So if we have had 50 years of below replacement fertility, which is now feeding into too few youngsters entering the workforce against all of those in their 60s leaving it, then we certainly need to plug the gap somehow. And so about 600, 700,000 net immigrants. But a very large proportion of those are not even entering the working population. They are perhaps dependents. They are, many of them, supposedly students, not necessarily actually studying anything valuable. So we're in some ways in the worst of both worlds, where we're not having enough children, we are having mass immigration, but that mass immigration is not focused on what we actually need as an economy.
Someone raised the question via text earlier in this program is, do we need to make sure that the immigrants coming in, there are men and women in equal amounts, so there's a chance of them contributing to organic growth later on?
Well, I think the immediate needs of the economy are for workers, whether they are men or women. I think if you're taking a huge number of people on boats who are claiming to be asylum seekers, they are overwhelmingly going to be men. So you're going to have that imbalance. I think the most important thing is that they are people who you actually want in the country and who meet our criteria for immigration, emerging out of a democratic process. So what the government actually says it wants based on what the population wants, that they're able to go into the workforce. But I think the most urgent thing is that we can't forever rely on immigration. We used to have mass immigration from Poland, for example, from Ireland. These are countries that are getting richer, don't necessarily want to come, and have got much lower fertility rates. The only countries with high fertility rates, where more and more countries with low fertility are going to have to recruit, are countries with very low socioeconomic development, very low education. And so it's really going to be a problem relying on immigration. The best thing would be to be having our own children from the whole of our community, our multiracial, mixed community. We all need to be involved in that. And actually, no government has made any kind of statement to that effect. And in fact, Keir Starmer has specifically said he's not interested in fertility.
Well, we just had Lisa Nandy on, and she said it's not the government's job to help people have children. She said people should be allowed to have children and should be, have the choice, but it's not the government's job. The other point, though, is that the point you make about lower educated societies having a higher birth rate is a function of that lack of education. As soon as a society gets more education, this is a good thing in some respects. Women get educated, there is more equality, so women have careers, there's more equality in the workplace, so there are fewer babies being born. That seems to be the function of every developed society. And there's an argument that it doesn't matter what the government does, every developed society has a low birth rate.
Well, that is why we will only be able to recruit immigrants from undeveloped countries with all the problems that involves. Now, in terms of the government not having a view on this, of course, no one's talking about anyone being forced to have children. But throughout the developed world, from France to Australia, many quite sensible middle-of-the-road countries, not necessarily those of the far right or the far left, governments have encouraged people to have children because a healthy society and a healthy future requires a healthy demography. And the government has views on all sorts of things that we do, whether we exercise, what we eat, but it refuses to have a view on whether we actually have any kind of future at all.
Just finally, there's lots of Malthusians who listen to Times Radio, and they're always saying to us, hang on a second, we need a lower birth rate because there's too many people in the country, there's too many people in the world. Why don't we have fewer kids and actually shrink the population, because that'd be good for the environment, that'll ultimately be good for the country and for the world?
Our emissions in Britain have gone down per capita, down and down and down. So we're definitely making progress there. You do not actually improve the environment if you say we won't have kids, aren't we virtuous? But we need lots of labour, so we'll ship people in from very low emissions countries to fit into our country with high emissions. We're simply shifting people from low emissions countries to high emissions countries, which of course raises emissions. It would be much better for us to have our own children.
Paul, really interesting stuff, thought-provoking as ever. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
That's Paul Morland there. He studies population numbers. You can tell where he comes from. His book is called No One Left, Why the World Needs More Children.
The Times front page covers the latest figures that show a record rise in the UK's population. You're now living alongside at least 68.2 million other people. That has gone up by 1%. And of course, 680,000 people in just a year, all because of immigration, because death outstripped birth for the first time in 50 years outside the pandemic year. Earlier on, we spoke to the Culture Secretary, Lisa Nandy, about whether governments need to do more to stimulate the birth rate.
I don't think it's the job of government to tell people how many children that they can have, and that's certainly not something that...
Is it the government to encourage people to have the ability to have children? I mean, maybe you have a role, the state, to say... I mean, you sound like Kemi Badenoch when you say that, actually. Maybe it's the role of the state to foster a time to enable more... Because we do need births to outweigh deaths, don't we, in this country?
We want people to have choices and chances in their lives, wherever they live and whatever their circumstance. And it's certainly true that there are a lot of pressures on the younger generation. Their housing costs are incredibly high, childcare costs are incredibly high. But we want people to be able to choose to have children and not to have children, depending on their own personal choice.
Edwina, do you accept that it's a choice between... I mean, there might be some nuance here, but it's a choice between accepting a degree of immigration, hand-picked, presumably, if you're able to do that in terms of skill levels or countries or whatever, or trying to somehow encourage people to have more kids?
Well, if we don't have the babies, and we haven't had for many, many years, and it's not just in this country that the birth rate's been going down, it's been going down right through the developed world. But if you don't have the babies and you still need the workforce, then you're going to import them ready grown from somewhere else. That's what's been happening. This is my turn for a rant, if I may.
Go on.
Because I blame feminism. I really do.
Oh,
feminism,
no.
50 odd, honestly, feminism 50 odd years ago was all about changing the law that was so discriminatory against women. But the model that was adopted by the feminists, and I've never been one, the model that was adopted was to be like men. And that means that childcare and being a parent is really quite problematic. So you go from a situation where my grandmother had 8 children to a situation where my 2 daughters have given birth to 1 between them. And that's because the pressure is on women not to have children, but to have a career instead, with the assumption that you cannot actually manage both. Now, you can manage both if men will adopt more of the role of women.
Well done, Edwina. I was waiting for a mic drop moment.
Some do, but on the whole, they don't. They don't. The vast majority of the work in the home, the vast majority of the parenting falls to the woman. And then she's also expected to be a chief executive as well. That's why parenting seems to be so difficult. I don't get it. When my lovely daughter takes her little one out, it takes an hour to pack a bag. Why? You just take a hand and go, put a coat on, go. Well, we've got to take this, we've got to take... No, you don't.
But Edwina, so Edwina, your 2 daughters who've had 1 child each, I don't want to pry too much, but have they said that they what are the reasons for them not having more than 1?
Well, I think in one case it was a question of chance, and the other, bless my London daughter, has a lovely adopted girl, because they did try and it didn't actually happen. My point is more that we seem to have made child rearing difficult. We talk about the cost of child rearing. We talk about all the problems and all the perils. Nobody ever talks about the joy of it, the pleasure of it. I mean, I
feel like I talk about both, but just as from a personal point of view. But it feels like it is a bit harder. I don't know. And I understand your point about feminism, but anyway, I'll come back to that in a second, because I know that Giles is definitely harumphing in the background, because you, Giles, I wouldn't say you're that typical, but you obviously, you share the kind of child rearing and childcare because you largely work from home.
Yeah, drawing my own personal parallels in these situations, it always ends up being specious, because I'm so lucky to earn a sound wage working from home and stuff. And it's a huge pleasure of mine to be able to as always, Esther is the front line, really. But but we share 50%, the workload in the thing. And that's great. And it means we could have two, we wouldn't have more. But it's an interesting thing, isn't it? I mean, I remember Harry and May. We're in a situation with this immigration, a bit like the old cab driver joke, where you flag him down and say, how would you get to King's Cross? And he said, well, I wouldn't start from here. It's like, we wouldn't start from here. You wouldn't start from a world with 7.8 billion people and huge immigration to this country, some of it legal, some of it not legal, to address these problems. The young all think they mustn't have children because of the environment, because the Green lobby, of which I fully paid up member, totally green me, but it sends out the message, the worst thing you can do is have children. People are the thing that desecrate the environment. But we all know that economically, there aren't enough. So what we have is too many humans for the planet, but not enough for the individual economies. And as everyone lives longer, and we all have to care for other things, what you have is this aging workforce. And at the moment, we've had it longer than anyone else. Us and Japan have had this aging workforce problem. So we haven't got enough young people to keep old people like you and me and Edwina, going up in time,
Hang on a minute.
alive. Who's going to be caring for us? Who's going to be wiping our bottoms? It's going to have to be immigrants. All that. Now, but the thing is that somewhere like Nigeria, with its massive population, Nigeria is now on the cusp. And somewhere as big as Nigeria, which used to feed labor around the world, isn't about to have an aging economy and not be able to support its economy. When places like China get there, then we're not. There will probably stop being anybody to immigrate to do the jobs for us. So what's
the we are where we are, and we may have started in the wrong place to get to King's Cross, but what's the answer?
It's unknowable. It is as difficult as the solution in the Middle East or something. I mean, you get to this point where what can we do? More people are going to bring the planet to an end, but in the short term, before they do, we need them to do the jobs.
Have you spoken to? I know your children are really young, but do they? Because my daughter says she's going to have two children for some reason. She's decided, a boy and a girl. Do you? And she may obviously change her mind by the time she grows up, and for all the reasons Edwina was talking about. Do your children? Do they want to have lots of children, or not many children, or none?
I think now that they're in the cusp between knowing what you have to do to make children, but not yet wanting to do that thing. They're in the kind of period where the it means they can't really imagine. I mean, Kitty will absolutely just not planning to give birth, and Sam, who's 11, is not going near enough to a girl in his future plans for that sort of thing to happen.
Okay.
I hope it has to be two, doesn't it? It has to be two and not three each. You sort of hope. Although you need three to grow the economy. So that we have more English
Stig's
people.
Done well. Stig's done well. I've underperformed with one. Stig has overperformed with three. This is the story of TImesRadio breakfast.
Well, the thing is Stig is desecrating the environment but bolstering the economy. It's a Hobson's choice.
Yeah. Edwina, go on. What were you going to say?
I was going to say I would go back to people being able to work, having a national insurance number from the age of about 14 or 15, so they get into work, so they're not still children when they're 19 or 20. Because part of the problem is that if you postpone having your children until you're in your mid-30s, you could well find that you can't have it, however much you want them. So, let's get back to the way things used to be, and still are in many countries, where people marry much younger, where they have their children younger, and then they can expect to have long lives and many careers in future.
Yeah. It's actually reshaping how we plot the course of a life. It's very, very hard to do, but that's exactly what you're saying, that we have this view that you get to 30, then start having kids.
No. I've said to my daughter, sorry to go on about it, I've said to my daughter that she should have her children, if she can, in her 20s.
Yeah. And whether everyone follows that, maybe that will be a societal shift. So one of the
It's so interesting that Asma said that. That's what I said to, that's what exactly what Esther and I both said to our daughter, which is, both of us, well, Esther didn't, but I, like Asma, had my kids a little bit later. And I'm thinking, And I just said have them, God knows, have them when they're 20. If you have them when you're 40, I'll be dead and I won't be able to look after
Exactly.
you. Have them,
But the
have
other
them
thing-
when you're 20, and then go and get a job, then go to university. Have them at 19, you know?
Yeah.
Asthma, the one thing you have to add to that
Go on.
is have your children now, and I, as grandma, will help you.
Yes. Oh, yeah. But she doesn't quite understand that yet because she just thinks the fairies will look after them. But yeah, fair